He spent 10 years in silence, until royalty came calling with one royal visitor.
His name was Callan. He lived 10 years without hearing another voice in person, 10 years without a knock on the door, 10 years without laughter or footsteps that were not his own. The ranch sat near the dry bones of a forgotten river where nothing but wind and dust remained. He woke up before sunrise every single day, not because he had anywhere to be, but because the silence grew too heavy. When the sun slept too long, he would drink stale coffee from a rusted tin mug, walk out onto the porch, and listen to the wind blow over the hollowed valley that used to be filled with wheat and cattle. Now there was only memory, only silence, only him. He had once had a wife, a strong woman named Lillian, who believed in flowers and storms and rebuilding, and when the fever came it took her in a single night. He buried her beneath the old willow tree behind the barn, and he never left the ranch again, not for a single day, not to the town, not even when the roof began to sag, not even when his boots wore holes clean through. He spoke to the goats, sometimes to the wind, other times to her ghost. He began writing letters to no one every winter, letters that always began with "if someone finds this someday," and he would place them in the tin mailbox at the end of the dirt road, knowing no one would come, and yet not able to stop himself. It was something to believe in, even if belief had become a habit he no longer trusted. Far away across the distant sea, across the high mountains and behind marble walls, sat a queen named Aurea. She ruled a kingdom with a quiet fire, a sovereign born not from war or inheritance but from a revolution that left her family line shattered. She wore a crown not of gold but of thorns, gilded by iron and reputation. She trusted no one, not truly, for those who had sat beside her once had poisoned wine with their smiles. She walked the palace in silence, often choosing the corridors where no one lingered, and in her chambers beneath the palace, in the library of the lost, she read letters. Remembered, she read one, then another, then another. They spoke not of demands or politics or war. They spoke of the sky, of grief, of goats, of a barn roof that leaked, and a willow tree that sang lullabies. They spoke of Lillian, they spoke of loss. Not in words sharp like swords, but soft like rain. And when she reached the last one, dated nearly 8 years before, it read, "I am still here." I reckon that means something, and for the first time in a decade the queen felt a breath that was not laced with sorrow. She gathered her cloak, chose 2 guards who knew how to stay silent, and rode west with no emblem, no parade, no decree. It took weeks to cross the frozen land, and when they reached the hills the carriage could go no farther, so she walked the final miles. Her boots soaked, her hands blistered, her spirit burned with something she had long forgotten, and when she reached the cabin she found Callan standing by the fence, hammering a rusted nail into a post that no longer stood straight. He turned slowly, as if hearing a dream instead of a voice, and when she said, "Your letters reached me," he did not fall, he did not cry, he simply nodded, and said, "About time." Then he turned and poured her coffee, and they sat on the porch, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world, the queen and the rancher side by side in silence. Letting the wind speak first, he never asked who she really was, and she never explained. He only said, "If you came this far, then you must have needed a place to rest," and she did. So she stayed a day, then another, and by the 3rd morning she was feeding the goats, and by the 7th she was mending a fence beside him, not because she had to, but because she wanted to, and the people who came searching for her were turned away with only a whisper, "She is safe, she is healing." Callan never once asked her for anything. He never tried to impress, he simply treated her like a person, not a crown, and slowly she began to remember what life had once felt like, before power, before titles, before every word had to be a weapon or shield. They talked of books, of rivers, of how silence could sometimes be louder than war, and one night beneath the stars she said, "What if I asked you to come back with me?" And he replied, "What if I asked you to stay?" And neither spoke again until dawn, but something changed in that stillness, and the next morning he packed a bag with 2 shirts, 1 knife, and a worn notebook, and said, "Reckon it's time to see what I missed." When they returned to the capital, the world tilted, courtiers froze, servants whispered, nobles gasped, but the queen walked through the halls with Callan beside her, a man with sunburned hands and boots that still held the dirt of the hills, and she said to her council, "This is Callan, he is my brother, not by blood but by bond," and no one dared object, for her voice held the weight of mountains. He did not become a lord, he did not sit at the high table, instead he fixed the garden walls, he rebuilt the old stables, he taught the palace cooks how to make cornbread with nothing but flour, oil, and fire, and when orphans came to the gate he made them laugh with stories of goats and stubborn fences, and the queen watched it all silently, knowing she had brought home more than a friend, she had brought back part of herself. And when the floods came, and the people panicked, it was Callan who led the workers through the water, stacking sandbags, digging trenches, staying awake for days, and when the storm passed they found him asleep against the wall, soaked to the bone but smiling, and from that day the people no longer called him rancher, they called him keeper, for he had kept the land safe without ever asking for a thing. Years passed, and the kingdom grew not in gold but in grace, and each time the queen grew weary of court she would walk to the edge of the city where Callan had built a small wooden house with his own hands, and they would sit on the porch drinking tea brewed too strong, and she would rest. Shook she gave him a garden where only he could walk, and a bench with Lillian's name carved into it, and when he could no longer rise alone she would visit each dawn not as queen but as sister, and when his breath faded on a morning laced with fog she buried him beneath a willow tree she had brought from his land, and the people gathered from every corner of the realm to place stones at the roots not as ritual but as gratitude. And years later, when the queen herself stood on the edge of life, she asked to be taken not to the royal tomb but to the ranch rebuilt, restored, renamed Callan's Rest, and they placed her beside her brother. And in time the story of the queen who adopted a forgotten rancher became not just history but legend, whispered from mother to child, from traveler to stranger, and always ending with the same words: sometimes the ones we need most are the ones the world forgot. And as time went on, and the dust of ages settled across the land, there were those who journeyed far just to see the place where the queen and the rancher had once sat on a porch drinking tea, watching goats, and arguing gently about which season was kindest. The porch itself had been preserved by the villagers who came each year to repaint it using the same faded blue that Callan had once chosen without much thought, though now it had become a symbol of quiet strength and simple grace. The tree they had planted grew tall and thick with stories, its branches wide enough to cast shade on any traveler who paused, and beneath its roots the soil seemed to hum with the echo of a life lived without demand, without spectacle, yet full of meaning. Children ran past its trunk shouting tales of the cowboy who built palaces and the queen who traded her crown for a hammer, and no one corrected them, for in those stories there lived a truth that no history book could capture. A young woman named Alara, who had once been a servant girl in the palace, now worked as a keeper of the land. She wore boots like Callan, and carried a spade like his. She taught others how to plant, how to grow, how to listen to the earth rather than command it, and she often said the ranch is not just a place, it is a promise, it is the proof that no life is too small, no soul too forgotten. And when dignitaries from foreign lands asked why the royal garden bore no marble statue, no towering monument, she would lead them to the willow tree and say this is where it began and where it still lives. They would kneel beside the bench, see the names carved into wood, and understand that some legacies do not rise in stone, they bloom in silence and endure in soil. One winter a traveler from a distant empire came through, worn from war and hungry for something he could not name, and when he reached the ranch he found warmth not in gold but in bread handed freely by an old woman who remembered the queen from her youth. He asked, "Who taught you to live like this?" and she replied, "A man who had nothing but gave everything, and a woman who had everything but gave it up to remember who she truly was." He stayed for a week, then a month, then never left. He became a builder of fences, a painter of barns, a teller of stories, and in time people forgot his old name and called him simply